All right, so I think we're going to get started. Thank you guys very much for coming. I am going to briefly introduce myself and say a few words about the theme of this panel. And then I'm going to briefly introduce all of our panelists. And I'm just going to let folks know your name, where you are, and maybe one of the things that came from your bio. And I'll just ask you to say a few words about your organization rather than reading the large chunks of text in people's bios, which I always feel like it's a little better coming straight from you guys when you talk about what you do. But we're going to talk about sort of the hard truths about social enterprise. We're going to talk about the stuff, hopefully, that people generally don't talk about, that we think anybody interested in doing this should know, that you need to know. I find that this often goes unsaid, and instead there's this fantasy about, all of a sudden you become Tracy Phalangian, right? And you're giving the keynote at GSVC. And it's like this charmed, beautiful life to become a social entrepreneur. But it's so much harder and much more complex than that. And I speak from experience. I am now the executive director of the Center for Social Sector Leadership here at Haas. I've been teaching here for about 5 years. But before I joined full-time, I was running a social venture that I co-founded. And I ran it for about 14 years. And so in my role as moderator, I'm going to try to ask some of the questions that reflect things that I saw, and hopefully we can have a real conversation about this. And I'll just tell you one story that reflects one of the 3 themes that I want to surface here in my introductory comments. And the one is that there is a real personal cost. There is a real personal cost at a financial and an emotional level of being a social entrepreneur, right? And in my opinion, you have to really be deeply, deeply impassioned at an almost biological level to get up every morning and do this again when it feels like the whole world is sort of against you in one way or another, if not ideologically, then logistically. And I have had some great mentors over my career, and at one point when my social venture was going through a huge pivot, I was really struggling. And I was having lunch with one of my mentors who's a very seasoned tech entrepreneur and has launched and built a number of companies. His name is Don. And I said, I am having a really hard time right now, Don. How do you do this? How have you hung in there? And he just laughed, and he sort of pushed back in his chair, and he said, this is all just a confidence game. And like everybody else, I go home and curl up in a ball and weep at night. And I was kind of blown away, but then I was also really relieved that I wasn't the only one. And so that issue of personal cost is real, and I think that the decision to become a social entrepreneur, which is something that has become celebrated and lionized and much more attractive than it was when I started, I'll tell you that. It can drive you and distort the decision-making about how you're going to spend your time. And I think it's important for people to understand that. And then the second theme that I know we're going to discuss is really what impact actually means, right? And Julie knows this story because I tell it all the time, and some of you have heard it before also. But the first time I went to SOCAP, how many of you have been to SOCAP? Okay, and so most of you probably know what it is. It is a conference on social enterprise and trying to do good with a social version of capitalism. And the first people I met were the founders of a kombucha company called Haas Kombucha. Have any of you ever tried Haas Kombucha? Right? Yes. So they were trying to convince me that they were a social enterprise. And their argument went something like this. 3 of us used to be unemployed. 2 of us aren't white. We're a social, it's kombucha. We're a social enterprise. And I just call complete bullshit on that. I don't buy it. If they had approached this in a different way, maybe it would have been more resonant. And then the third theme that I know we're going to come to is just how complex and challenging it is to do this work because of how complex the operating environment is, how deep the breakdowns are in society and in markets, and how deeply imperfect existing marketplaces in social enterprise are, and or the complete absence of marketplaces, and what that means for trying to actually be a social entrepreneur. And we have exactly the right group of folks on our panel to talk about this, and we're really fortunate to have these folks here. I'm just going to introduce them all briefly. Julie Lean is the co-founder and president of Tummel, and she's going to say a little bit about Tummel. But one notable thing about Julie is that she was named as a Forbes 30 under 30 for social entrepreneurship, right? So you got that nice.
Co-founder, but yeah, that's fine.
That's your co-founder? All right, just take it. I know, it's another lesson. It's in your bio, take it. Nick Pearson is the founder and executive director of Jacaranda Health. He's also an obstetrician. Is that right?
That's my wife.
That's your wife? All right. Hey, this is a theme, right?
I'll take it.
All right. All right. Are you serious? It's your wife? All right. Now, this is another important lesson. You should read materials much more carefully than I did before you moderate a panel. All right. So, Wood Turner, I don't have any information about your wife or your co-founder. I'm sorry. What does your brother do? Do you have a brother? All right. And actually, I really am not trying to do this to be funny. I just completely misread these bios. I wish I could say it was a purposeful joke. But Wood is the head of sustainability, was the head of sustainability at Stonyfield. It is now the VP for Equilibrium Capital Group. Right? Did I get that right? Okay, phew. And then Carolyn Whistler, who is the co-founder and partner for advisory services at Third Sector Capital. And she leads a lot of the work on making arrangements for pay for service. And so I think that there's a rich conversation here that reflects a lot of what Tracy talked about with regard to just how challenging the work is and how complicated the environments are that social entrepreneurs work in. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Who's going first? Marissa? All right, Carolyn.
Me. Hi, everyone. As Ben mentioned, I am also in the Pay for Success social impact bond space. So at Third Sector, we specifically work on helping governments and nonprofits change the way that they do business. And we started about 5 years ago as well, and I'll just run through some of the lessons learned and would love to open it up for conversation from others too. So the first, I think, as we started both looking at a field where social impact bonds didn't exist, there had been one done in the UK, we were thinking that, there was a lot to be learned from that. There were things that could be done differently. My co-founder George Holzer and I embarked on what we thought was a roller coaster that, was sort of like the Superman or whatever and ended in 3 minutes and then things would be smooth sailing. We quickly realized that when you're a social entrepreneur, which I've never actually called myself that, but here we are, the roller coaster never ends. And you need to become comfortable with instability and comfortable with ambiguity, because especially in the field that we're in, where you're not only trying to create a product or do something differently, you're trying to change behavior and change the way that markets are performing and change how these actors are working together, whether government, private sector, nonprofit, communities. The system is always changing. The environment is always changing. The roller coaster will not end. Just when you think you've figured out your business model, I promise you that there will be another turn. There will be a change in the way that the environment is working. There will be a change in the other competitors that are in the space or the other players that are coming in. You will learn. And so being uncomfortable is really important. And I think just to get to the personal side, I definitely had some serious anxiety applying to grad school 3 times, doing all these things that I thought, this is never going to work out. I want to get off this ride. Having people in that roller coaster car with you that you trust, that you can puke on when things get gross, that you can cry on, has been critical. Because one thing is for sure is that when you're a social entrepreneur, stability is not the norm, and in fact is never there. On the other side, I was trying to think of hard lessons too that I have learned, and I think that being in the social sector and working with nonprofits and government, inherently thinking that, we're all gonna stand together and everybody's working together and let's all sing Kumbaya and do this great work. The reality is that competition still exists as a social entrepreneur. Many of the resources that you're going after are finite, whether that's that particular grant opportunity, whether that's that really exceptional candidate that you all want for your summer intern or you all want to join your team. I think there's, I don't want to, sort of gloss over the fact that there's still competition when you're a social entrepreneur. And so you're not only dealing with a changing environment, you're dealing with lots of different players who all of a sudden say, hey, what you're working on is kind of cool. We can do that too. And you need to sort of adapt and evolve with that. And because of that, collaboration is even more critical in our sector than I think, You can't just build your own industry and ignore what else is going on. We end up collaborating and learn the hard way that, collaboration can actually both benefit your competitors, but can also benefit you and can open up new pathways, new products, new projects that you never thought could be possible. But it's even more essential because we're in this space where you're working with multiple actors. And then I wanted to, cue music for Let It Go. I just had to include this one, and I think there's a couple of layers to it. For me personally, it was not to take things personally. Again, as you're building an organization and it grows beyond you, you will have people that move on to other opportunities. When my first person quit and left for another job, I was like, oh my God, I have failed. I should just pack up. I don't want to show up for work the next morning. What have I done? A person doesn't want to spend their entire life working at this organization with me. Let it go. So in some cases, don't take it personally. If you don't get that grant and it goes to someone else who's a frenemy, a competitor, collaborator in your space, that's okay. Don't sweat the small stuff. But on another level, I thought, for me personally, being one of the co-founders at Third Sector and starting this organization and being in this field where there was no set roadmap of how you're supposed to do a social impact bond. And yeah, there's been 7 that have been done so far. We're still figuring out what's actually the best way to do these. And that means you have to let go of your ego a little bit. And you have to let go of your ideas sometimes because they may not be the best ones. And you also have to let go, and this one was really hard for me as the organization grew, you have to let go of sometimes doing the things that you love most at the organization. So I loved being in the deals, working on the details of each organization and each project, and really, negotiating with the stakeholders to pull a project together. Okay, we're 30 people now. I can't do that for every project. I have to run an organization. And so the moment where I had to bring on somebody else to my project in Cleveland, Ohio, for example, negotiating to help homeless mothers reunite with their children in foster care, and I couldn't be in every meeting because I'm building a San Francisco office, and I sort of relinquished that expertise, that was really hard. For me as a social entrepreneur to move from being the one who was that expert content-wise to someone who was more of the manager in that organization. And when I finally let it go, it was way better for the project, it was way better for the organization, and it was a lesson tough learned. The next one, sort of seek wisdom and feed your soul. Particularly when I've moved out to California, I've noticed that there's a big premium placed on action, and sometimes not a lot of thought behind that. And there's a great quote that is attributed to various folks, but that I think of a lot, which is thought without action is empty, and action without thought is blind. And I found that, sometimes the inertia of being a social entrepreneur and just moving forward on a path, is something that, you think you're making great progress, but you're not developing that vision and foresight. And it took me a while to realize that to actually prioritize in my day where I'm pushing everything forward, to take time and actually call up or have lunch with that mentor, even though I'm going with a tough time, to actually find a mentor, right? I'm not sure I have any to speak of, but I do have people I can call up for lunch. And that is really important, to seek out that wisdom, because it's easy to think that, I'm in a new field, no one's done social impact bonds before, no one knows what it's like. They do. There's analogous industries. There are people who have built organizations before and have a lot to share. And at the same token, I know I mentioned that I sort of let it go. A lot of the passion that I was working with at the organization, do not completely outsource what you love most about working on at your organization, because then you risk losing the passion to work on it all. So while I have let go, we've got about 35 projects now across the country with different governments, and I'd love to be in on them all. I'm still in 3, which is more than I should be, but I need that. I need to feed my soul. I need to be out on a bike and running on the weekends, and you have to make time for that, because otherwise you can just be consumed, if you will. And so the last one that I think is really important for social entrepreneurs, I wanted to end on this one, is so we've all heard stay hungry and foolish. I think we're all hungry to make an impact. And that's why we're sort of ambitious and do what we do. I'd like to have it be stay humble and foolish. I think that one of the most important lessons is while we are both have the incredible audacity and the hubris to be working on something so hard, we're not just starting a business, we're actually trying to change the way government does business. That's crazy, procurement reform, or trying to change how nonprofits and communities work and trying to create new markets where there are none. Totally crazy, audacious goal. Yet if we don't maintain the humility throughout that process to understand that we're focused on this, we are one of many actors, we can't do it alone. We also haven't been around, many of us are younger, we haven't been around the block that many times, and there's folks, I work with folks in government who have been working in government longer than I've been alive. You need to keep that humility and that tension between wanting to accomplish something audacious and being humble enough to know that you're just one piece of the puzzle to get there. If you're going to convince people, not just that you have the right answer, but that they should get behind you and follow you and change the way that they're doing business to improve the world for everyone. So those would be mine.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let's get that deserves some real applause. Do you want to? I think that what we should do is maybe go through the slides and then start the questions from the audience, because I suspect there will be some overlap thematically across these, and so I think it will lead to richer conversations. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. And so Wood, you are up.
Thanks. This is gonna be really interesting because we've all created these slides in a vacuum, and I'm so curious sort of where the overlap is gonna exist, and sort of also in just how we're all defining social entrepreneurship and social ventures, because there are so many different kinds of organizations. But I'm currently with a group. I just started with a group called Equilibrium Capital. We're an investment company focused, investing and operating sustainably focused assets in agriculture, renewable energy, green building, and wastewater. It's terrific. I'm new to the team and really excited about what we're doing. But most recently, I was the VP of Sustainability Innovation for Stonyfield Farm, the organic yogurt company. I believe Gary is speaking tonight, if I'm not mistaken, which is great. Have just moved to the Bay Area from New Hampshire. But I had moved to New Hampshire from Seattle to work with Gary in 2006, 2007 on a project called Climate Counts, which is a nonprofit venture that Stonyfield helped start, that I was the founding executive director of, which scores and ranks large companies on what they're doing to address climate change. And I think about all the things you're talking about, Carolyn, about just the blood, sweat, and tears that go into these kinds of activities. We started the project in December of '06. My goal was to launch an index of company scores on climate performance by the summer in a major media outlet. Move my family from Seattle to New Hampshire. My wife needed to finish her residency, have a baby in the process. And when I think about that time, that 6 or 7 month period, it was just mind-blowing to me. And ultimately, we ended up launching, I think, an incredibly exciting project. I'll never forget the date, June 19th, 2007, in the New York Times. My son was born a week later, and then the rest sort of just fell into place after that. But I became the board chair of the organization a few years later and moved over into the Stonyfield business. And we thinking about Climate Counts, we just completed a merger with the Carbon Disclosure Project and are working with them on trying to use sort of all the work they've been doing and the brand that they've been building in sort of the investor space on climate action and connecting it to our work with consumers. So that's my social venture, and what I'll talk about here. My tips are mostly tied to that experience. I really think it's important when you're starting an organization, when you have this idea, when you're trying to engage with in a very high-minded, sometimes abstract way about what it is you're trying to accomplish, that you have to start thinking about how important it is to become an operator. And I think you said some of this, Carolyn. You have to know what it is your organization is actually doing. It's not, and I think the closer that entrepreneurs can get to the real meat of the work, the better the long-term outcomes are going to be. If you sort of as you build teams and get deeper into the weeds, begin to separate yourself from some of that operational activity, I think there's a natural sort of weakness that can get built into into your organization. So I think that's really important. I think it's also really important to think like an academic, think like a professor, have big ideas about what it is you're trying to accomplish. What is the global significance of what you're trying to create? But when you communicate about it, you need to talk about it in plain terms. You need to speak about it in a way that can move people.
What are you saying, Wood? What do you? I'm just teasing you.
I'm
just giving you a hard time.
I should say, with all due respect, because
No, you're absolutely right. I was just teasing you.
Because I think about it sometimes. There was often a criticism made of us at Stonyfield, which in many ways was a classic social venture started in 1983. That we sometimes had the reputation of communicating too deeply, too professorially about sustainability, which is a key part of our business. Providing too much information. I'm gonna. You'll see in my fourth bullet. I'm gonna totally contradict myself here, but almost overwhelming our audience with information about our point of view. What it is, the deep thoughts that we had about sustainability. When really what was important to that business, to our business, is to make an emotional connection. Why is it that you, as a consumer, would care about what it is that we're focused on as a business? So I think it's really important to kind of try to reconcile those two ideas in your mind. Have big ideas, but communicate about them plainly. As you build your teams, first, hire to values. Find the people that you're going to surround yourselves with who really understand why you started the venture in the first place, that really get the concept, because that's going to be, in my experience, that's going to be the hard part down the road. As you grow the organization, you're going to have, it's going to be more and more challenging to find those people who really do connect to the values of the organization. As it grows and as different dynamics happen inside the organization, you're going to get further and further away from that, or have the potential to get further and further away from that. So keep that in mind. Think about that. Hire to values. I actually think and we can debate this. I think it's in many cases. I think you'll have. It's a little bit easier to actually find people that have the functional expertise than it is to find people that actually can be grounded in sort of why you started the business in the first place. Next point: err toward transparency. There's going to be a lot of sausage making in every venture that goes on, and I think there is a reflex or an instinct that some of us have to sort of keep that behind the scenes, to keep that sort of out of view, or even to keep that out of view. And I think you build credibility. I think you exude a high integrity approach to what it is you've done. If you can find a way to engage your stakeholders in all the challenges that you're dealing with as an organization, I think it's sometimes hard for people, for stakeholders to connect to some ventures that seem like they have it all buttoned up. I really love the way Tracy talked about it. She says, she's clearly done a tremendous job, but there are day-to-day challenges that she's chosen not to keep out of view. She wants to put those all on the table so that everybody can understand what's going on. And I think there's obviously a lot of challenges associated with that when you're engaging investors. They're concerned about the risk that they're exposed to because you don't seem to know what you're doing. But I think ultimately the outcomes are better if the people that you're engaging with on a regular basis really understand the hard work that goes into it. And then the final point I'll make is anticipate your legacy. At some point, your organization, your venture will change. You will change. You will move on. Key players will move on. You can fill in the gaps of all the things that can happen to organizations, good and bad. And I think it's really important to find ways to shore up what the long-term legacy of your idea really is. I mean, are you putting the establishing a foundation, sort of putting a structure in place, articulating a vision that's clear enough, engaging teams that can ultimately carry your legacy forward, whether you're involved in it or not. I think that's really important, and I think a lot of times, in a lot of I see a lot of organizations that really do struggle with this. They think they've figured out how to actually ensure that their idea exists as they built it 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And it's a very hard thing to do. So anticipate that moment in time when something is going to change, and we can talk about some of those ways to shore up that legacy. So those are my tips. Look forward to engaging more. Thanks.
Thank you, buddy. Okay, Nick, over to you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Morning.
Morning.
So I went to Haas. This is
Woohoo!
right on. And this is exciting for me because not only did I do my MBA here, but I helped run judging for GSVC. So this is like coming home. This is like the most exciting day of the year for me. And it's phenomenal to see sort of how far GSVC has come in the last 7 years or however long it's been since I graduated. It's totally cool. And the finalists that have come through, and it just keeps growing and growing. So hats off to the team that's organizing it this year and the teams that are coming in to compete. I run Jacaranda Health, and Jacaranda Health is an organization that is our mission, our vision. Thanks, Grace. Can you guys hear me? So our mission, our vision is to ensure that all women have access to high quality and safe childbirth, and no matter sort of how rich or poor, that they get access to a safe delivery, that it's affordable, that it's respectful, and that it's joyful. And the way that we're doing that is that we're setting up a couple of hospitals in East Africa, and we started in Nairobi. We set up a couple of our own hospitals, and we're building better systems for delivering maternal health care. So the idea is it's a sort of an operating model where we're becoming experts in delivering these sort of high quality systems for care. We've gotten 2 of our own. We just opened our second hospital 6 months ago, and we've managed to sort of deliver high enough quality care at low enough cost that we've attracted the interest of the government, and we're starting to take what we're learning, the sort of systems and processes that we're building, with an eye on sort of impact at scale, and taking those into the public system. So our kind of end goal is to influence the quality of care in the public sector hospitals that deliver sort of 90% of the babies in the country of Kenya where we're working. So end goal for us is to be able to sort of be the R&D shop, the centers of excellence, where we're kind of pressure testing these better ways of delivering care, and then figure out a way to kind of transpose the systems that we're building into the public sector. So we're still sort of early in the journey. We've been at it for 4 years now. We've grown to a team of about 70 people in Kenya. I'm based here in the States, but most of our team is there in Nairobi. It's been really exciting, but I feel like we're still really on the kind of early stages of it. I had 5 points here. I want to trade 3 of them for a really quick poll of the audience. I don't really have any sort of sense of who's sitting here. Can I just do a real quick poll? How many of you guys are students here at Haas? And students, sort of business students broadly? How many of you guys are either competing in GSVC? Awesome. How many of you guys are involved in a startup of some sort, or sort of aspire to be starting your own social enterprise at some point? This is not just totally academic. Okay, that's kind of what I was just getting a handle on. I can kind of see the general demographics, but it's nice to sort of know who's here. So I was trying to capture just a couple of thoughts from my experience, and I think when I think about the last couple of years, and when you look, for example, at the finalist teams here at GSVC, which look phenomenal. I mean, just from the quick kind of cursory look I've seen at the organizations that have come in, and you look at the kind of business plans that early stage social enterprises put together, I can pretty much guarantee you that 50% of them or more within the next 2 years their business plans are going to be substantially, if not totally different, right? And you know, any of you who have started up an enterprise or kind of gone through this process yourself, and this is certainly true of us too, you know, it's like, you know, you have to adapt. You're going to be wrong with those initial operating hypotheses, and the only thing that really gets you through that is the team of people that are behind you, that you build around you, and that's both. And I draw that circle sort of broad enough to include both the sort of your core team of people that you build, you know, your sort of core management team, but also more broadly speaking, your kind of the people that you enlist to sort of build the movement around you, your board of directors, your sort of advocates and mentors and advisors. You know, these guys are sort of everything, and they're your force multiplier. And it took me a little while to realize that. I think, you know, when I started this process, I was really more sort of on the wonky side, like, you know, this is about the business model, and it's really cool. You know, we're going to do these things and build this scale out and stuff. I mean, I think it's easy to get wrapped up into that because that's the sort of first step in the process. But I think it's, you know, if you're not investing a lot of time in the early stages and all the stages beyond that on really like hunting and seeking good people to bring on board, then you're not spending your time wisely. And you know, for us, where we've had to go through a variety of different iterations, both on our kind of earned income revenue model, where our, you know, our sort of clinic model has gone from sort of mobile clinics then to sort of version 1.0, where we had our first hospital that looked like this and wasn't very successful, and now we've just launched a second hospital that's gotten you know, dramatically more successful in terms of kind of bringing in patients and revenues, and then to this sort of pivot where we're realizing, hey, you know, actually we're not going to get impact just through our own facilities. We really have to do it through this, you know, sort of this government impact approach. Like the only thing that sort of that makes you that kind of wakes you up to that you know, is going to the only thing that's going to sort of point out the problems with your business model and also sort of you know, help push your thinking on that as a sort of a leader, and also help you sort of weather the storm with your funders, or, you know, kind of push you through those pieces, or the people, you know, the sort of core team of people around you. So that's a sort of a simple thought. And just, you know, sort of to corroborate that, I was just last couple of weeks ago at this Draper Richards Kaplan retreat, and this is an organization that funds a lot of really top social entrepreneurs, nonprofit social entrepreneurs in the sector. And there were like 40 or 50 really like phenomenal social entrepreneurs in the area. These guys, total rock stars. I mean, a lot of them doing amazing things across healthcare and education. And they were going around the room and talking about their sort of number one challenge that all of them faced. And it almost to a person came down to each organization, the 40 or 50 people went around the room and they were sort of writing them up on the board. Almost to a person, their number one challenges were around like either like finding a key person like a COO, or it was like a weakness on their board of directors. It didn't come down to funding. It didn't come down to their sort of business model. It didn't come down to a sort of a key partnership. It all came down to to sort of the people around them. So I can't emphasize that piece enough. Second piece that I want to just highlight, and this is my second point. I gave up the other three.
You can go through them all.
Yeah. We can always come back to them in the Q&A too. I don't know.
Consider it a gift after calling you an obstetrician.
It's just you know, there's a little bit of, and this was true particularly I think 4 or 5 years ago when we were starting up, but and I think the sector has evolved a little bit since. So I worked at the Acumen Fund before I started Jacaranda, and so I was kind of on the other side of the table, you know, doing social venture investing, and you know, there are a lot of really great organizations that do, and so now Wood is on the sort of the other side of the table himself now too, you know, and there are a lot of really phenomenal investors out there, and people sort of you know, kind of supporting social entrepreneurs in the space. And the interesting thing is, though, that, you know, I think sometimes it can get a little bit dogmatic around kind of capital structures and organizational structures. You know, when you're sitting there as an entrepreneur trying to figure out, like, what should my, you know, it's like, I have this mission, I have this cause that I'm really passionate about. Like, I want to do maternal health in Kenya, or I want to do whatever, education in the States. And you're trying to figure out, like, does it make sense to be a nonprofit or a for-profit or whatever? Like, you know, the people who are advising you are oftentimes the guys with money, and the guys with money have a sort of vested interest. I mean, they're sort of peddling the flavor of capital that they have, right? And so, you know, ultimately, like, we ended up deciding to be a nonprofit. And I don't regret that decision for a moment, because for us, it would have actually been really easy to get for-profit capital. I mean, there are a lot of kind of social great patient capital kind of organizations that could have given us sort of Series A money to launch these hospitals, because it was an earned revenue strategy and stuff. But I mean, the fact is, these are really tough, kind of broken markets and razor-thin margins that people don't know a lot about. And if we had taken Series A capital, I mean, we'd probably be bankrupt right now. I mean, so you need to sort of figure out what's going to actually work best for your organization, and sort of cut the noise a little bit, because a lot of the people who are sort of advising you in this thing do have vested interests, all very well-meaning, and it's not like they're sort of there's anything bad. They're always coming at it with the best intentions. But it is there's a decent amount of sort of dogma in the space around what's right and what's not right, and you just have to sort of navigate that yourself. Oh, let me stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. All right, Julie.
Hey everyone, my name is Julie and I'm the co-founder of Tummel. We are an urban ventures accelerator, and we are a nonprofit with the mission of empowering entrepreneurs to solve urban problems. So what's kind of interesting about us is that we are structured as a nonprofit ourselves, but we support entrepreneurs at a really early stage. We provide them with early risk capital in the form of $20,000 in seed funding, mentorship, free office space. And so we have the benefit of working with a number of entrepreneurs who are trying to solve city problems. So they are social entrepreneurs. Their specific focus is around urban impact. I would say I don't want to go through my whole list as well, just to kind of pick and choose. And I think that the conversation topics have been pretty rich, but I'm going to try to borrow from the experience that not only did we have as starting a social enterprise, specifically a nonprofit, but also our entrepreneurs have as starting for-profits, hybrid organizations, public benefit corporations, and many of the other models that we see today. So I would say the first thing is investors don't go easier on you because you're doing something good. And this is something that our entrepreneurs have actually run across. We had an entrepreneur that entered an angel group pitch competition around social good. And they were going through months and months of diligence and questionnaires. And they were like, why can't we just get the money? We're women, we're doing good things. We're trying to help, these disadvantaged, vulnerable youth and, formerly incarcerated. And we were telling them, because you have to prove it, you have to work for it. And I think that there's oftentimes this expectation of, hey, you're in this social good space, so investors, will understand that you have to be patient, you have to do these things. They don't go easier on you. So just prepare for that in advance. I think starting any type of startup is hard. A social enterprise startup, also really hard. Not surprising. Number two, there's no such thing as easy money. And our entrepreneurs get this a lot, especially when you're reading in, different magazines and blogs, and you see this culture of money's running rampant. You're just, making it rain everywhere. Yay. Not the reality at all on the ground. I think the burden of proof has become higher and higher. There's a new kind of saying that seed is the new Series A. They want to see that you have some sort of traction. You have a team that can execute. You work well together. You're not going to take their money and blow it up. So I would just temper your expectations, because I think when we were getting started, so many people were like, oh, there's so many foundations that are just drowning in money. They want to give it to you. Just set your expectations appropriately. Nobody is going to be, throwing dollar bills or hundreds of dollar bills at you. Number three, execution trumps all. I think that this is really undervalued. Good ideas are a dime a dozen. And we've been approached by a lot of entrepreneurs who, want to sell their idea, their vision, and they say, oh, will you sign a non-disclosure agreement? Or I have the most brilliant idea. Doesn't matter. Unless you're going to show that you're able to execute on it or that you've had some traction, it doesn't matter. Good ideas are a dime a dozen, but when you're actually doing something on the ground, I think that makes all the world of difference. Number four, this is to repeat Nick's point, team will make or break your startup. Undervalued, that teams often break your startup. So founder splits happen all the time, and it's gets messy. There are legal things that can get involved. It gets really dicey, and you don't want to be a part of that. So make sure that you trust the people that you're with, that you don't feel like you're going to be in a situation where you get screwed over, that you don't screw anyone over. I mean, I'm not trying to advocate for kumbaya, but I do want to say that this is really undervalued, how often startups break up early, even pre-revenue, and it can cause a world of hurt, legal, financial. And finally, early risk capital is hard to find. I think that this is true. Some people may not feel that way, but I certainly do. And we've had, now dozens of startups that have gone through our program, and they say to themselves, oh, I'm a perfect fit for this program-related investment, or I'm a perfect fit for this foundation, I'm a perfect fit for this impact investor. All right, the number of times I've actually seen the perfect fit become that earliest investor, I don't know if I could name a single time. You will find early risk capital in surprising places. Create allies early and often. Find people who believe in you. It could be an angel investor. It could be, somebody else in, a tech community that wants to see an improvement in homelessness or workforce development. You never know where your capital is going to come from, so be open-minded. And I definitely encourage you guys to do this. I know that we've been talking about a lot of the hard things and lessons learned, but it's an awesome journey. It's really fun. And if you do decide to start a social venture that solves urban problems, come talk to me. Thank you.
That's great.
So I just want to say thank you very much to our panelists. They gave you an incredibly rich array of really thoughtful, useful advice that I think you will see proven over and over again as you begin or continue on the journey that you're already on. So thank you guys very much for putting so much thought into that. I'm going to start with one question, and then we're going to turn it over to questions in the audience. But so Whit, it was interesting. I am perhaps embarrassed to say I did not think of Stonyfield as a social venture, but you called it one in your comments. Can you talk a little bit about the meaning of what is a social venture? What does it mean? And then also maybe reflect a little bit on your role as somebody who may have been a bit of an entrepreneur within Stonyfield, or maybe not if the whole place was considered a social venture. Because I think that that's, to some degree, part of the challenge, and it helps drive the conversation on some of the larger issues about what impact is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also quite interested in sort of that definitional sort of conversation. Sometimes it's hard for me to figure out which organizations really fit that mold. But I call it a social venture because, I think some of and you'll hear Gary talk about it tonight. It's his venture, so let him define it for you. But it started as an organic farming school, and I think he was on the board, I believe, of this organic farming school, this nonprofit organic farming school, and they were trying to figure out how to raise money to support the school, and they had this yogurt that they made on the side when they were teaching people how to farm and how to produce value-added products, and decided to start selling that yogurt to deliver on a mission, a vision that he had, that he could build a business that had a limited impact on the environment and could be profitable. So to me, that's a perfect definition of a social venture. And one of the things that always excited me or attracted me to Stonyfield was that there were so many people inside the organization who had come from similar mindsets, who had come from nonprofits, had come from a wide range of I would say sort of impact organizations in the marketplace, who really wanted to be a part of that business and really wanted to be a part of sort of making organic yogurt, organic food increasingly accessible to people. And so that's where it comes from for me. Inside the organization, you're absolutely right. That I definitely saw myself as an entrepreneur, because at the end of the day, when you start 30 years into a business, I mean, it is about producing a high quality, safe, delicious product that can meet your retail customers' expectations, your consumers' expectations, and can grow. And so keeping an eye on sort of that 1983 sort of mindset, that mission, that social vision is really important, and it takes people inside the organization. It takes specific people inside the organization to kind of own that and drive that. And so, so for me, a big part of what I was doing there was trying to connect this sustainability mission to our top line goals. So it was a great organization. I will talk about Stonyfield and live Stonyfield, forever. It was a tremendous organization, and I'll always be inspired by what they were about.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience yet? Okay, yes, I saw your hand up first.
Hi, I'm Azalea from Guanyanti, also competing. But I guess my question is, I mean, a lot of us here wants to be social entrepreneur also because that kind of like ego of like our idea, my idea is gonna change the world. But like, is it common, or how is it going to be received by investors or other people if you actually see that other social ventures already have a very good idea and you want to bring it to your, for example, like Jacaranda Health work in East Africa, and we want to bring the same model to like Southeast Asia, for example, but like it's similar ideas with different context and setting, but then it's not a completely new idea in a way. Like, is this common for a new social venture to do some sort of like a franchise type kind of thing? And how does investors react to this kind of new ventures building on other people's idea?
That was something Tracy was talking about. I feel like in some ways the whole first model.
I mean, I would jump in and say I don't think it's common enough in social venture. When you look at the for-profit landscape, Uber has dozens of competitors around the world that are incredibly well capitalized, and many of the major venture capital firms in Silicon Valley fund their competitors to do something similar in Southeast Asia and India and different parts of the world. I think that we could benefit from looking at the models that have been successful and using those models to replicate and scale in other places. Obviously, it's very contextual, but I think my general feeling is you should look to best practices.
I'll be honest, I think it's also a sign of maturity, right? When it's not just about you and your idea, but it's about the best idea. And if really Jacaranda is doing something amazing in Kenya that could be applied in other places, actually engaging with them, not just saying, hey, that looks good, I'm gonna copy it here, but creating that dialogue with folks that have actually been there to be able to apply, again, contextually, what works. I think our the field that we're in, pay for success, social impact bonds, is a perfect example. So Tracy was mentioning started in the UK. This was concepts that my co-founder and I and others had been talking about for a long time. UK was the first one to do it. But as we were looking at it, we were like, okay, that exact structure is not, it's a great idea, and it's great that it happened. We want to focus on this. The exact structure that happened in the UK is probably not going to be the best. In the United States, which has a lot of local governments, cities, counties, states, is not sort of a centralized government system that's in the UK. And so we really learned from that experience, but brought our own experience to it and our own context and adapted and sort of applied the idea differently here. So.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think there actually is a big appetite among the social venture funders for that kind of thing, and increasingly, not just among the sort of traditional social venture funders, but also I think there's some specialists who are looking increasingly at some of these kind of replication opportunities more explicitly, like franchise and licensing agreements, so for what it's worth.
Okay, you had a question here.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I was curious, I feel like there's a lot of silos sort of within the bigger impact world. So there's like organic food sector, and there's social impact bonds, and it's easy to sort of meet all the same people, get to know that community really well. What have been the ways that you guys have been able to sort of break out of that and expose yourself to a bigger set of the sector, raise capital from them or collaborate with them outside of sort of that core set of folks you see often?
Good question.
I mean,
I'm happy to jump in here. So one thing that we've found surprising at Tummel is, we basically operate as an early stage funder for many startups in the social venture space. And so many of the peers that we look to collaborate with and also get money from are, the people who tend to be big in this world, like the Omidyars and other folks like that. But what we found pretty interesting was that for our startups, their early stage risk capital was actually coming from a lot of kind of traditional tech, angel investors, micro venture capitalists, other pretty traditional actual investors, which we found surprising. And it turned out that their risk tolerance was much higher for even social ventures. And so we basically collaborate with them a lot. We've seen now a number of funders, whether it be Soft Tech Ventures, Maven Ventures, a lot of B partners, folks that, are kind of traditional folks from a funding standpoint. And we think that that's been a really productive way to get more people kind of roped into the social world as well.
I'll be honest, Lindsay, I think that the problem of being siloed when you're in your own social venture is really real. It's easy to stay in your world because you've got a lot to do. And so I'll be honest that it's really kind of events like these or SOCAP or other conferences where in terms of bang for the buck, forcing yourself, a lot of times I'm like, no, I've got an organization to run, we've got projects to close, why should I take time out and do this conference, to go to this dinner with folks? Make that time, because that's how you can break out of your silos and actually end up meeting new collaborators or new opportunities. Every time I actually pull my head up, some great opportunities happen, yet it becomes harder and harder to justify when you feel like you've got so much going on the home front and in your own world. But I do think that actually some well-selected conferences, associations, you mentioned the group of Draper Richard Kaplan's fellows, like actually trying to get yourself into some networks and communities really proactively can really pay off in the long run.
Yeah, just to echo that, I think you have to make networking kind of a less casual sort of activity. I mean, it needs to be a job. It needs to be part of your job. And I left the conference circuit for a while because it was overwhelming. I felt like definitely when we started Climate Counts and then being at Stonyfield, people were always asking us to come talk about our, what we'd done, and there was less give and take. It was more us sort of giving and not really receiving anything back, and so I pulled back for a while, but then got back into it again and realized there's so much value in it. And I think you also have to realize that you've identified it. You have to talk to people who actually you have to force yourself in some ways to talk to people who aren't in your silo, because the happy accidents are real. They happen all the time. There's nothing more exciting to sort of than talking to someone who seems completely out of the space that you're in, who will throw something back at you that makes you realize a pathway you'd never considered, and it's hard sometimes to do that. But it's a skill set you have to sort of hone. How to have those kinds of conversations, or even be open to conversations that don't drive you into sort of the weeds again. Drive you into the weeds about sort of what it is that you're doing day to day in your world. You have to kind of be open. So.
Other questions?
I have one, Ben.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
I have a question. I'm Phil Mitchell, and I'm just curious if in this social capital world that you all seem to be participating in one way or the other, is there enough capital? Or is there an issue of getting enough investors interested and knowledgeable about what the opportunities are?
No. Sorry, I had to jump in. I definitely don't think there's enough capital. I mean, there's capital that's been allocated that goes predominantly, I think in the latest JP Morgan study, they said $46 billion were under management that went somewhere toward the social sector. 41 billion of those 46 billion go to to non-startups, basically to public markets, to real assets. There just isn't a lot of capital in the early stage venture setting for new startups to emerge. I mean, that we're basically saying that's $5 billion that goes to either seed, Series A, or late stage venture funding, that's less than Uber raised this year alone. I mean, to put it in perspective, it's so small. We need more capital, especially toward startups.
Yeah, I would just say that from our organization perspective, we're in the business of raising capital for ourselves, but for each of our projects, which in itself could be an impact investment. And what we see is, again, the senior lender tranche, everybody wants to be, you've got the Urban Investment Group from Goldman, you've got Bank of America, all of the banks, everyone wants to be in that senior level tranche, which is the least risky of a very, very risky impact investing opportunity. These pay for success projects, 7 in the country, haven't really proven themselves out yet. So even then, we're finding it's easy to find that top tranche, but the risk capital, whether that's credit enhancement from foundations or others, or just folks that are willing to take a chance, much harder to raise. And so we're finding that's really difficult. And then also tricky, and I don't know, I'd be interested, Julie, in your thoughts, but as a nonprofit sort of intermediary in this space where, and I'm not sure the types of social ventures folks are working on, but different from actually running hospitals or projects, we're in the business of building government's capacity to do outcomes-driven contracting work. We're more consultants, we're more intermediaries, and it's a lot harder for us to raise capital, operating capital as a nonprofit for us than I've had people say, why don't you guys just turn into a B Corp or a for-profit? Because you got a great business model if you can get governments to pay for your services. But from a philanthropic standpoint, we have a hard ask as a nonprofit social venture because we're an intermediary more on the capacity building side.
One quick, I mean, in a slightly different segment, one quick gap that I guess I've seen a number of people identify, and we encounter it ourselves, is the, in the sort of nonprofit social venture space where you see there's a lot of the sort of early stage seed funding, sort of Echoing Green, Draper Richards, the sort of competitive things, which are phenomenal networks and phenomenal ways for a lot of, GSVC type organizations to really get their start. I mean, it's a really amazing way for great ideas to get, to fledge. And I think where a lot of organizations stumble is after a couple of years where there's not really a sort of a mezzanine after that. It's sort of like the idea is theoretically Skoll is somewhere out there, and then there's kind of big funders somewhere out beyond that. But like, it's the kind of in between. What do you do after a couple of years when you need a couple of $100,000 before you get to the Gates Foundation or whatever?
So the bridge financing.
That's, peers of mine in this space and our organization ourselves, it's like we're trying to figure out like how do you get across that bridge.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, I'm Kathara Green, and I work with Net Impact. And so we work with a lot of young people that want to become social entrepreneurs. So do you guys have any advice for the pre-social entrepreneur, like things people can be doing while they're in their MBA and maybe not ready to start something themselves?
I would just start by saying, it's great. I think entrepreneurs are a unique sort of group of people because they are idea people. They have big visions, they have big dreams, they have big aspirations about what their ideas can do. But sometimes they don't always focus on, and this kind of dovetails with something I said in my 5 minutes. They don't always focus on some of the functional aspects of sort of how they'll run that venture or run down the road. And so, I think in social impact or environmental impact in those spaces, we need more people coming into those kinds of ventures from finance, from marketing, from a true operational background. And I think that's sometimes forgotten. I think it's sort of. I think there's almost too much focus on entrepreneurial training, sort of how to sell an idea versus how to operate an idea, how to run an idea. So I think that's my thought there.
Yeah. And to the same point, I feel like I speak with a lot of folks who are wanting to be an entrepreneur or in search of an idea. I think one of the things consistently for all of us is that, finding really great teams and finding causes that maybe they're existing organizations that you're passionate about, but becoming part of a team where there maybe already is a great idea that you can help execute on, I think is something that I would encourage folks that are perhaps in business school to seek out if they're particularly passionate about. Look, if there are organizations, if there are teams, join them. And if there's not, and you're like, you'll become much well-versed in what the state of the field is, and if there's really an opportunity that may result in an idea where you can have a unique value in that ecosystem. But I think there's just as much value, and you can be just as entrepreneurial joining a team with an idea that's already being worked on as, starting off something new just because you want to start something new.
I agree with that point, and the business plan competitions are always a good kind of training ground for that kind of thing. The other thing I'd say, for people who are going through MBAs is like, it's like I can't think of, I can't remember like how many of my MBA classmates, it's like, they're like, I'm really interested in social entrepreneurship, but I'm going to use my MBA summer to go work at Genentech or McKinsey, just to like lock things down a little bit. You know what I mean? Like if you're really interested in this space, it's like you should spend your summer interning at a social enterprise. It's like spend your summer doing that, because that's going to be your, that's the exposure you're going to get, and that's, you're going to be in the trenches and sort of know how to do it. And a lot of, increasingly, these business programs are offering sort of financing opportunities for ways to make that easier to do it. I know Haas has a great program to do that. And conveniently, organizations like Jacaranda Health sometimes offer opportunities for cool students.
I have a slightly different perspective, which is I think you should do it. JFDI, just freaking do it. Go out there, do it, execute, prove it. Don't sit there thinking about, talking about, potentially maybe doing something. Go out there and do it. You have all these classes that you have basically leeway on projects. Go do some customer interviews, find out if they want something, and start it up. It's really, I know that it seems so hard when it's theoretical. Spend some time doing the customer interviews, run a pilot. The school is such a safe place to do it, and then you might find that you love it.
Great, thank you. Clapping for that? You should. That was inspired people. Other questions? All right, I have one. So Caroline, you had talked about how competitive this field actually is, right? And many of us have heard the term co-opetition, right? Because you also surfaced the critical importance of collaboration and have reinforced it in your comments. Can you just speak at almost a practice level, like maybe you at a personal practice level, about how you manage that line between being in an environment where you're very friendly with and working closely with people that at times you are also having to compete with for funding or market share or otherwise? How do you deal with it? And how would you advise people to deal with it?
101. No, and I think a lot of things, particularly when you brought up, so I would say it's, these are difficult conversations, and they're relationships that, like it or not, they're going to be there for the long term, right? And so you have approaching those conversations with respect,
and even having the conversations, right?
Having the conversation.
Because that's something that I think some people can't imagine. Like,
oh yeah.
So you're saying go and talk to these folks about it.
Absolutely. And so you start it off and you call it, and very upfront, but calling that like, I know this is a difficult conversation. I know you've been talking with the same funder, and we've actually been talking about really similar projects. So I'll use an anonymized version of a same example, and saying here, being really transparent about here's what we've been talking with them about. I know this is what you've been talking with them about. It really seems like if either of us are going to get a chance to, the best shot at resources here, our best case may be partnering, or it may be actually that it's not in this case. So certainly approaching the conversation, having the conversation, approaching it with respect, transparency. I will tell you, and this is also the business we're in with governments and nonprofits and others, but being just really transparent about the fact that, particularly in our field, everybody's looking for new roles and ways that they're going to stay involved. You may have started as an intermediary, now you want to be a program manager, now you want to be investing in projects too. Being really upfront and kind of maintaining those relationships, calling up people when they're not just difficult conversations, but maintaining that, approaching with real transparency. And I think, just being really open as to what point this may be a collaboration point, when it may be a competition point. And, I call up people when I'm like, hey, I know we talked about this and then we saw that you went ahead and pursued this with someone else. Like, what, not saying, having the real conversation about, why did you decide that was the right path forward? And maybe, you can't stop them from doing it, but acknowledging, being kind of the bigger person, like, hey, we're going to be playing in the same sandbox for a while, and what you did sort of was not mutually respectful of me, so need to move it forward. But it's been a lot of, it doesn't always feel good, and those are still the most difficult conversations that we have, but respect, transparency, and if you're seen as somebody who is clearly, an honest and trustworthy person in your interactions, there are going to be times when you compete, and the best path is not collaborating. Okay, that's fine. But as long as you can have that honest conversation about it and be seen as that type of player in the marketplace, it will benefit you. I cannot tell you how many times it seems like we show up as co-branded on a lot of applications. It has yielded huge payoffs, both in terms of resources we're able to access, but we're in a business of getting governments and nonprofits and funders to work together differently. And if we're seen as a collaborator and a partner versus someone who's forcing NDAs or exclusivity and different forcing partnerships in place, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so you have to engage in that kind of 100% honest, 100% caring, which is one of our big values as a firm, conversations with both folks in your firm and outside.
Great. Anybody else want to comment on that? I feel like you said it very well.
Great.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, I think you're going to maybe get the last question. Go ahead.
Can you speak to some of the differences between for-profit entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, sure. So, I think that they're actually, and obviously I'm biased because we tend to work with predominantly for-profit, B Corp, hybrid type of organizations, but for-profit entrepreneurship is very similar to social entrepreneurship. One, it's really hard to be successful. That's a defining theme. It's hard to start a startup that's successful. It's hard to start a social venture that's successful. I think what's different is that capital sources can be different, but I'm a big believer in being pragmatic, much like Nick here, and saying, you should let your goals define that capital structure and who you go after, instead of trying to be really rigid and dogmatic about it. And I think that the big difference from a funding perspective is that there have been more successes in traditional for-profit ventures than social ventures, unfortunately. We haven't seen a ton of big exits. We're starting to see, there are obviously great examples like Stonyfield that are awesome, but we need a lot more exits in the space to prove out that this is an investment-worthy category, and that this is a place where you should be putting your money instead of putting it into, some other type of asset management. And so I think that's one of the biggest differences and one of the reasons for there being the capital gap that there is.
Anyone else?
So for us, this is a question that we continue to grapple with as an organization that has a pretty serious earned revenue model. But for us, we really view it, it's primarily a tax status distinction, but it's one that's important for us because the ultimate change that we want to affect in the world is changing how government allocates resources towards results. And if we are seen as a for-profit that is profiting off of creating projects that improve social outcomes for individuals, really hard for us to build trust with our government partners, really hard to build trust with our incumbent nonprofit providers that are working in these communities. So it helps ensure that the incentives, our incentives as an organization, are aligned with the incentives of the parties that we're trying to get to change behavior.
Okay, I'm going to wrap us up. We have about 1 minute. I wanted to make just 5 observations that I feel like reflect the conversation we've had and are some themes that have run through the comments from our panelists. And the first goes back to the earlier part of the conversation, which is that there's no way that this is always personal, right? And you can never take that out of the equation if you decide to work in social enterprise or to be a social entrepreneur, and you need to find ways to manage that. And you need to deal with that to be successful, whether it's singing Let It Go, which is a great idea, right? Or some other practices, and that stuff, while it sounds soft and squishy, actually really matters and is critical to your success. The second, and this came through a lot, is just that understanding the nuts and bolts of how you operate is critical, because I also agree that execution does trump everything. And also knowing when to staff up in a way that lets that execution happen with continued excellence, with the knowledge you have to lead effectively in a different role with regard to execution. I think that that's very important. The third thing that came through was the importance of the team. And although the word didn't get used as much, I think related to that is how critical culture is, and the culture you build to deal with an environment where you're always facing ambiguity and being forced to adapt very frequently. The fourth, and this is something that Lindsay raised, the importance of ecosystems and your role in being an ecosystem builder. And SOCAP is a great example of a very powerful ecosystem that emerged when people combined their visions for how to actually advance this field. And it is sort of the place of the happy accident that Wood talked about. I can't recount how many happy accidents I have had there. And then the fifth is just that it's critical to lead, manage, and operate in a way that acknowledges that your mission and vision for what you're trying to do always trumps your ego, and that no one is above that mission and vision, and to let that framework drive you towards collaboration, towards competition sometimes, and toward building a team with excellence. So those are my 5 observations. I think our panelists are going to be here for a while. Let's thank them again for their great insight. Thank you.